I have to say right up front, Cursed is one huge slog of a roller coaster to binge in just one day, which is exactly what I did. And a roller coaster is the best way I can describe this series. All you want is for it to find its footing and stay there. But sadly, that's not always the case. So when it's good, it's great. But when it's not good, it can feel like a frustrating waste of time. So let's discuss, but don't worry, this is a spoiler-free review. Now, this story is set within the world of King Arthur, and more specifically, is acting as more of a prequel-type story that shifts our central focus away from Arthur, and instead upon a character played by Katherine Langford, whose character is more famously known as the Lady of the Lake in Arthurian legends, this character of Nimue, and her journey and significance with the Sword of Excalibur and her connections with Arthur and even Merlin. I'm all for clever spins or different sides to traditional stories as long as they're told well, but that's the trick. It has to be well written to get me on board. So let's start off by talking about the positives and the things that I really liked about this show, and then we'll transition over to the negatives. Now, right off the bat, my first positive that I want to talk about is Katherine Langford in the lead role. Now, I've been a huge fan of hers since 13 Reasons Why, and I'm so glad that she finally landed a lead role past 13 Reasons Why that really allows her to explore other elements and genres and showcase her raw talent as an actress. She definitely carries the show, even though I do take qualm with where the writers take her character about midway through. But this is a classic case where the actor manages to elevate the material, even if the material isn't that good at times. She's already proven to me that she's a wonderful dramatic actress, and she was able to deliver her more vulnerable, conflicted, tragedy-stricken side with ease. But I was more excited to see her confident, commanding side and her being a leader, warrior, and even a badass. And she brought her A-game to many scenes that depicted those latter qualities I just listed. Katherine Langford is still a commanding lead and an enchanting actress, and this show still leaves me excited to see more of her in this role, even if the writing in the first season shortchanged her more than she deserved. Now, I do give this show credit for exploring quite a lot of story elements and locations in just 10 episodes. They definitely didn't stay in one place for too long, and it helped keep things interesting, especially for the first half of the season. And also, there are a lot of surprises in this show, and many twists and turns, and many which I didn't see coming, which definitely hooked me in a number of times. That being said, I find that they relied on surprises maybe a little too much to help distract you from the flawed writing or not so exciting happenings that preceded the surprise. It's like just when you're on the verge to mentally check out and get on your phone that there's a big moment or a surprise to catch your attention back to the TV. It wasn't always like this, but it definitely pulled this cheap trick quite a few times, especially in the latter half of the season. Now, this show definitely spent the Netflix money on the locations and effects. Sure, it's not quite at the level of The Witcher, but it definitely has some breathtaking visuals quite often. I'd say that about 80% of the effects were great, and only 20% felt just a little cheap. And I'm glad that they did spend the money on the effects and locations and really showcasing a beautifully rich world, and it helped make up for some of the flawed writing throughout. Also, I do appreciate the large amount of world building that they did. There are a lot of characters showcased and a lot of players in this game, and even though there are some I definitely like more than others, I appreciated the large scope and the world that they strived to create and launch this show off of. Now, there are a lot of characters in this show, and there are quite a few that I like well enough, but there are many frustrating inconsistencies or character moments that just didn't leave me loving too many of them. However, the characters I enjoyed most based upon their acting, their character arc, and or overall contribution to the story are Daniel Sharman as the Weeping Monk, Shalom Brune Franklin, who plays Arthur's sister, and then Lily Newmark as Pym, who could have easily been a huge waste of screen time as a character, but I actually found her quirkiness endearing, and she had some pretty funny moments. Now we're going to shift over and talk a little bit about the negatives and where this show kind of missed the mark. Now, the biggest criticism I give this entire first season is the inconsistency of the writing. There are moments with great character development, gripping narrative, character nuance, and epic fight scenes, but then you also get jarring character motivation changes, rushed romances, cringe dialogue, some dull side quests, or uninteresting story elements that don't bring anything substantial to the overall narrative. And this was a constant throughout the entire season, but especially in the last half. I would argue that the first 4 to 5 episodes were stronger in terms of smart writing and story structure, even if a lot of the story in the first half could be labeled as elongated setup. But even though the last half is more eventful, it definitely falls prey to some of its weaker writing choices. It's in the last half where I take qualm with the number of character motivations, and this even applies to our lead in Katherine Langford's character of Nimue. They made such a huge shift in her character, both emotionally and story-wise, that felt very rushed, a little jarring, and almost like it was something that should have taken more time to get to, like an entire second season. But like I said earlier, Katherine Langford's performance was still strong, even if I didn't agree with some of the character beats they take her throughout the last half of the season. Now, I was hoping that this show was going to be as grounded, gritty, and badass, much like The Witcher on Netflix. And there are definitely a handful of moments where it does reach that level. But I was really disappointed in the end with how often this show did lean more into CW territory. There's a romance prominently showcased almost from the beginning of the season that feels pretty forced and unearned, that took me out of the show, especially when they didn't pull back as I would have liked them to, kind of to pace themselves. And on a side note, and without telling you which characters this involves, there's literally a sex scene at one point in the show where they start to play a 21st century emo pop song as these characters make love, like mood music, and it feels so cheap and doesn't fit with the rest of the show at all. This show always utilized an instrumental score fitting for a fantasy epic, but this one sex scene is pitched to be like any other sex scene you would have seen from Gossip Girl or Riverdale. The song choice just felt so tonally off from everything else on this show, and it's the perfect example on how this show faltered in too many areas than it should have. And in general, I just wish that the dialogue had been consistent and smarter throughout the entire show, especially in the last half. This show was so amazing during so many moments where I just wished it wasn't so up and down. Now, when it comes to the story, I do think the show suffered by telling maybe a bit too much in just one season and introducing us to too many characters. I think that if they had trimmed down some of the storylines and maybe save a couple character introductions for season 2, this show would have been tighter, but also would allow the writers to explore characters and their natural development more organically. So even though the constant shifting of events in this season did result in some amazing action set pieces and intriguing narrative stories, I do think the writing equally suffered when trying to cram as much story and so many characters into this one first season. And like I had mentioned with Katherine Langford's character, even her arc almost felt like 2 seasons worth of character development just crammed and rushed into one. Now, on that note, I want to end on more of a positive, and that is that there needs to be a season 2, especially with how crazy that fucking cliffhanger ending was. But besides the cliffhanger ending, they managed to move all these chess pieces, shifting so many characters, and resetting this game board in a way that really excites me to see where it goes. There are characters that are changed for the better, some maybe for the worse, some in very tragic ways, and some last-minute surprises that I'm personally excited to see explored in another season. I can already see, just by how the game has been reset, that season 2 has potential to be a much better season, strictly from a story standpoint alone. Now, is it frustrating that a roller coaster of a show would save so many aces for the finale only to bait us and leave us hanging? Yeah, it's a cheap move, but it's an effective move nonetheless, because they certainly hooked me in to see where this story goes rather than give up, because what could happen is just too juicy to resist. Cursed is a roller coaster of a show with beautiful visuals, some epic moments, intriguing characters, and a strong lead at the helm. Sure, it suffers from inconsistent writing with messy character development and some cheap dialogue, but when it's good, it's great. And even though it was so heavily inconsistent and frustrating for the last half of the season, there's no denying that I'll definitely be tuning in to season 2 to see where this crazy story takes us next. I'm going to give Cursed season 1 a B-. And that's my review of Cursed, which you can watch on Netflix. I'd be curious to know what you think, so feel free to leave your thoughts and opinions down below. And as always, thank you all again for tuning in. Until next time, I'm Ryan Bamey, signing off. Bye, everyone.